All right, no CBC today, which means I get to do a video about whatever I want, which means we're talking about football. And if you hear that, that is the collective sigh of all my ex-girlfriends put together. But don't worry, this will involve politics, so any video that makes my audience happy and can make my ex-girlfriends roll their eyes collectively is a video worth doing. So the NFL has instituted the most insane affirmative action policy I have ever seen. And the reason I want to cover it on this Canadian politics channel is because it is so indicative of all the social problems we are facing from the radical left. And it is, I think, a great example of what Gadsad terms intellectual terrorism, right? So I'm going to explain this to you. There's a new affirmative action diversity rule being put forth in the NFL, and I'm not against all types of rules. Like, I think the Rooney Rule makes sense, especially like you have to interview minority head coaches for the position. You have to give them a chance. But this new rule is so insane, it actually disincentivizes teams from hiring black or minority coaches, not to mention the what constitutes a minority argument that we can get into later. So, the rule is, if you develop a minority head coach or GM, so if you have like an executive assistant or a defensive coordinator who is black or brown, or whatever the NFL classifies as minority, do Jews count as minorities? Who knows? Right? If you develop, right, someone takes your assistant coach and hires them to be their head coach, you get 2 third-round draft picks. Now, to anyone who knows anything about the NFL, that's an insane price, okay? Now, if you don't know the NFL, I'll give you a quick explanation, all right? There's 7 rounds in the NFL draft. The first round is the best, right? Second, third. But anyone who knows a lot knows really good teams build through the second to fourth round. Those are the most important picks because those guys are pretty much good enough to be starters right away, and they're a lot less expensive than the first round picks. And by constantly drafting well in the second to fourth rounds, that's how you build dynasties. That's how the Patriots have built these teams. They often trade out of the first round, accumulate those second to fourth round picks, use those well, get those guys on the rookie deals, let them, become good, walk away. You then cycle back another third round pick. This is the Bill Belichick scheme. Now, if you are a team like the Kansas City Chiefs with Eric Bieniemy, or the Niners with Robert Saleh, okay? And these are the 2 most coveted coordinators set to become head coaches. These guys would have become head coaches next year, regardless of what you did to the rules. The only reason they weren't hired last year is because they both made it to the Super Bowl, and the owners all jumped the gun and started hiring way too early. Well, these guys couldn't be hired because they were still in the Super Bowl. It was short-sighted. I could have told you Mike McCarthy wasn't going to work out. I've watched him screw up clock management for years, all right? But now, if we're going to hire Eric Bieniemy, because apparently, he's the next thing. Keep in mind, he's the offensive coordinator. His quarterback is Patrick Mahomes. He has all these different weapons, and Andy Reid calls the plays. So maybe he's great. But also, he doesn't call the plays. He has Patrick Mahomes, and he has an elite offensive line and receiving core to work with. And now Le'Veon Bell and Clyde Edwards-Helaire as running backs, all right? So if we're going to turn this guy into the next great thing, maybe, but keep in mind, he doesn't call the plays, and he has incredible talent around him. Robert Saleh, on the other hand, pretty impressive what he's done with a banged-up defense this year. However, if you hire Eric Bieniemy off the Chiefs get 2 third-round picks, and the Chiefs are currently a dominant team. If you're the Chargers, if you're the Broncos, or you're the Raiders, all the teams in their division who play the Chiefs twice a year, you would be insane to hire Eric Bieniemy. Insane. You would give the Chiefs such a competitive advantage, right? If you hire Eric Bieniemy and he doesn't work out, your fan bases will go ballistic because you just gave the Chiefs 2 chances at another 2 more good players, third-round picks, right? Bolster that team, right? And if you're an AFC team, if you're a competing AFC team, because again, usually the assistant coaches you hire are off the good teams, right? And if you're trying to sort of, take their coaches off a good team, well, that's your competition for the Super Bowl, or for the AFC, NFC. That's your competition for playoff spots, right? So why would you help those teams, right? So you see how this disincentivizes, right? If you're an AFC West or an NFC West team, right, you would be literally insane to hire Bieniemy or Robert Saleh respectively, because you'd give those teams such a competitive advantage. Same thing if you're a competing NFC or AFC team with those coaches. Yes, you could say, if Robert Saleh turns out to be the next Bill Belichick or Mike Tomlin, great, it's all worth it, right? But if not, think of how crazy your fan base would go. So what this really does, it does incentivize hiring black assistant coaches. All right? You want minority assistant coaches because you're hoping someone takes them off your team so you get the draft picks for them, right? But you don't want to hire a minority head coach off the competing team because you're giving them a competitive advantage. This puts black coaches at a disadvantage. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is because I'm the only one who's going to actually say these things, okay? No one in sports media has the balls to say, hold on a second, maybe this affirmative action program isn't actually going to help the black people, right? And this is what I hate about these things, because, like, oh, green energy. Well, sorry, green energy in Ontario increased emissions, but it's green energy. It means if you criticize it, you hate the environment. How? It increased emissions. This is like me saying, this is like if Hitler had called the Holocaust the Help the Jews program to get their kids into sleepover camp. And then someone says, like, how could the Nazis be anti-Semitic when they had a Help the Jews program and they got all the kids into sleepover camps? I'm like, well, those were death camps and concentration camps, and they murdered 6 million Jews. But they called it the pro-Jew program. Yeah, it was still the Holocaust. They still murdered a third of our people. But it's still bad. Right? This is, right? But affirmative action. And it was unanimously voted on by all the owners, which means every owner knew, okay, this is a terrible idea. But if I say no to this, right, the intellectual terrorists and friggin' Malcolm Jenkins will go, oh, this guy, Jerry Jones, Jeffrey Lurie, or whatever, they hate black people because they're not going on to this affirmative action program. Like, come on. Does no one, and everyone sees this. You can't tell me that intelligent football fans don't look at this and say, oh, that's a terrible idea. Not because, like, we don't want to see black head coaches. Like, you know, like, no one thinks Mike Tomlin sucks as a coach. I think he gambles on, like, 4th and 2 from the 27-yard line. He doesn't do that anymore, but those were insane to begin with. But, like, everything else, Tomlin's great on. Right? No one really make that case. But, you know, if the Packers, like, you know, we're looking for a new head coach. I like LaFleur. And, like, the Vikings had this really good, you know, black offensive coordinator who was promising. I'd be like, I really don't want to give the Vikings 2 third-round picks. So, like, maybe an AFC team says, yeah, I don't really care about the Vikings. I think this guy's good. We'll give him a shot. Okay, 2 third-round picks. But these are such high-valued picks in the third round. Like, to give people context, like, you know, all, like, superstar players like Jamal Adams and great quarterbacks, they can be traded for first-round picks. Like, good players, a good player's trade value, like a really good, solid NFL player, like a solid pass rusher, his value is like a third-round pick. Like, that's what these values are. So it's like 2 good players on a prospect of a coach. Like, and think of how ballistic these fan bases will go if you start, like, you know, if you hire like, you're like, oh, we're just hiring this defensive coordinator hoping that he'll become a head coach because he's black. Oh, and it turns out he sucked. He was only hired because he's black. Maybe he wasn't hired because he's black. Maybe the team legitimately thought he was best for the job. But how are you going to put this out of people's minds? And also, if you're a team, there's no way you would ever hire a minority coach, assistant coach to head coach of a team you're in direct competition with because you give them 2 third-round picks, and that's way too valuable. And then it's insane that no one can say something because it's an affirmative action. This is meant to help black people, even though it's like, look, think about this. This disincentivizes hiring black coaches and general managers. This is a disincentive. You make the other teams better by hiring black coaches. Why would you hire one? This is insane, and no one can say anything because this is 2020 and everyone is crazy and too afraid of their own shadow, except me. So, you know, like, subscribe, do whatever it is you got to do, push whatever buttons, you know, click the bell. Who cares? You know what? You know what to do. Do it.